Hello and welcome back to my series on the brothers Karamazov. If you missed the first part, you can catch it right here. In this video, I'll be going over parts 2 and 3.
Bottom line is,
read a book, people.
When I was reading the first part of The Brothers Karamazov, I found myself actively taking notes, and I think I was trying too hard to catch Dostoevsky's philosophical threads, which there are plenty of, don't get me wrong, and it's good to kind of pick at those and see if we can unravel them. But for parts 2 and 3, I wasn't as hands-on in sort of dissecting the philosophical aspects of the book. And this might be just my opinion, but I didn't think that parts 2 and 3 were as dense with philosophy as part 1 was. And it could be because I'm reading it through for the first time and I'm not able to pick up on some of those things. But right around the time I finished part 2, I sort of told myself that I was just going to let the story come to me. And so I didn't read with the same analytical eye as I did in the first part, which I think was particularly good for me in reading this through for the first time, because in my opinion, parts 2 and 3 are really where the story starts to get going, and I just kind of went with that. So nothing really stuck out to me as something I needed to think about too much in parts 2 and 3. Of course, there are things to think about, but I wasn't as in-depth with my writing and reflection. So this video isn't going to be as philosophy-heavy as the first one was. I sort of got wrapped up in the story, to be perfectly honest with you, and when that happened, I wasn't thinking about taking notes or doing anything else. I just kept reading because I was kind of on the edge of my seat, seeing how this unfolded. And I don't mean on the edge of my seat in like a cliffhanger thriller kind of way, but Dostoevsky writes in such a way where his characters are very compelling and he starts to weave the plot points together that he first introduced in part 1 and even part 2, and there are a lot of character developments in the middle of this book. And so it was fun to just read and get wrapped up in that and not feel like I had to take an active approach. But I think this is the deepest novel I have ever read in terms of its themes and what it grapples with. Dostoevsky does a phenomenal job constructing scenes that are so infinitely relatable. No matter who you are, you will find yourself in any one of these characters. And the thing I found in reading this is Dostoevsky has this ability to convey aspects of daily life that are pretty subtle and nuanced and would be difficult, at least for me, to articulate on the page, but the way he describes these interactions between the characters and conveys to you what each one is feeling at any given moment, he just makes it seem easy. But there are a few scenes where I try to put myself in Dostoevsky's shoes and describe what's happening, and it's really not that easy, which is why he's the author and I'm the reader. And one of the coolest examples of this is at the beginning of part 3, actually. And this is a spoiler alert, by the way. So if you haven't read the book, first of all, what are you doing? Pick it up, read it. And here I am not having read the book, calling other people out, but whatever, I'm getting through it. Anyway, back to part 3. I have digressed. The beginning of part 3 is the aftermath of Father Zossima's death. Rest in peace. Alyosha is obviously heartbroken and begins to question his faith in God. And all of a sudden, in the aftermath of Zossima's death, the people around him, like those closest to him, friends, people from the town, a cloud of resentment starts brewing around Father Zossima. And people just start trashing him for all sorts of reasons. And it's one of those situations that definitely happens in real life, and Dostoevsky does such a great job in explaining how people get there psychologically. But when I read that for the first time, I went back and reread it because I'm like, it's the best explanation I've seen, not explanation, but it's the best articulation of how a situation like that begins to brew and how it comes to fruition. But it's an example of how Dostoevsky is a master at describing the psychological developments of human beings and just understanding human nature. One of my favorite relationships in part 2, going back to part 2, by the way, is Alyosha and Lise. I hope I'm saying that right. It's spelled L-I-S-E. But their relationship just takes off. And I love their interaction together in her living room. They just seem like really pure people who want the best for each other. And I thought it was a great moment. I just couldn't help but root for their relationship. Another great scene from part 2 is Ivan's poem about the Grand Inquisitor, who basically lectures God in a jail cell in 15th century Spain during the Spanish Inquisition. It's a scene in which the Grand Inquisitor basically monologues the whole time with God as his witness, but he's also very resentful toward God. And this was one particular scene where we do get the deeper psychological discussion. And it's a discussion that is occurring right now in our own time. And after the Grand Inquisitor is done talking, God just goes up to him and kisses him. And I thought, I'm going to have to reread that again, but that just was a fascinating response, and it feels to me like that is a response that God would have had if I was reading the Bible and this story was in there, which I guess just goes to show, I think Dostoevsky has his finger on the pulse. He obviously memorized the Bible. I think it was the Old Testament. And I think he has a fantastic knowledge of the biblical stories. And everything just seemed to fit correctly in that scene. Later on in part 2, we get a background on Father Zossima. And this was a really, really cool chapter for me to read because there's this pivotal moment in Father Zossima's life where he has a psychological perspective change, where this mental shift occurs and he starts to view life completely differently. And he sort of shocks his friends and family with this shift. But it's interesting because as he sort of becomes his true self and embraces that reality, there's a man who comes around and meets him and is fascinated by how he acts once Father Zossima understands who he is. And the conversations and interactions that Father Zossima and this stranger have, I think, truly get at the heart of what it is that provides the sort of inner peace that we all crave for ourselves. And I felt that in reading Father Zossima's story. It was so cool. And I think it was so right as well. Right in the sense that what Dostoevsky is saying in this particular scene, the transformation that Father Zossima goes through, that influences him to change his behavior and literally change his direction in life, I think that Dostoevsky nailed that. I think some things in life can only be understood when they're felt, and there are multiple moments, and this is one of them in this book, where you feel those things. We can live them through these characters, and it's amazing. In fact, that might be my favorite chapter so far, is Father Zossima's background and this interaction with the stranger. It was just, it was the best articulation I have read of that specific transformation occurring. And I know I'm going on and on about Dostoevsky, but you know, I've heard that he is one of the best writers to ever live, and it doesn't take long to figure out why once you're 2/3 of the way through this book. Now, part 3 is sort of all about Dmitri, his background, his psychological state, and the relationships he's made, the history behind them. And through that history, we learn what motivates him now to act in the way that he does. And Dmitri is 100% a loose cannon, kind of leads with his heart and, you know, something else. He is an honorable guy, I think, down deep. All I could think about in the scene where he is getting questioned by the prosecutor and, you know, every law enforcement agent and their brother is there, is he's got a ton of confidence, like not having a lawyer there. I'm not sure how their justice system is structured, but Dmitri was talking very confidently about what had happened and seemed to be sure that his story was going to prove his innocence. But all the while, it's clear that the other characters are not really out for Dmitri's best interest. They're obviously trying to solve the case, but it seems like there's some shady stuff going on as Dmitri is answering these rather leading questions. And all the while, the prosecutor and the other law enforcement agents that are there, they're forming their own narrative of what happened, because it all points, the evidence points in one direction here. And the police are getting real comfortable with shaping their own narrative because of how easy the puzzle pieces seemingly fit together. And Dmitri, bless his heart, he's had like 9 panic attacks in trying to get Grushenka, who maybe finally ends up with Dmitri. I don't know. It's looking that way right now. But maybe Dmitri's love life will finally settle down into something that he and Grushenka are happy with. We can only hope. But once he gets all the other men out of Grushenka's life, he parties like it's 1999, or I guess in Dmitri's case, 1799, 1899, I don't know. One of those centuries. But I have just started part 4. I've got about 270-ish pages left. On the one hand, I can't wait to see how it ends, but on the other, you know, I'm starting to get to the point where I don't want the story to stop, and it's been nice to get to know these characters and just to experience Dostoevsky's writing and storytelling But ladies and gentlemen, I think that wraps it up for me for parts 2 and 3. If you got some value out of this video, show some love and hit the like button. Comment down below, let me know your thoughts if you've read the book. There's plenty to talk about through the first 3 parts. And as always, you might want to just hit that subscribe button for more content. I will be finishing this book, I think, by the end of this month, being May 2024, the year of our Lord, at which time I will make a part 3 in my Brothers Karamazov series discussing, well, the whole kit caboodle at that point. It should be a fun one. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you're there with me. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.